Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. So for today's session, we have four guest speakers with us today. So our panel is Jack Thompson, Amy Hill, Dean Manning, and Mark Trenholm. So I'm just going to give each of them about a minute to introduce themselves. You can just say where you're farming, what you're farming, anything else that you'd like people to know about you. Jack, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Jack Thompson, you see in the stream, West River Holsteins. We're a dairy farm in Antigonish. I bought at arm's length in 1998. Um, we milk, I don't know, 110 cows, give or take, 3 times a day, and we farm 450 acres, I would say. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it. I got a wife and 4 great kids, and happy to be here.
Very good. Thanks, Jack. Amy?
Hey, my name is Amy Hill. I am the owner of Snowy River Farms, which is in Cooksbrook, which is near Shubenacadie. I have a mixed farm, so we do 2,000 broilers on pasture. We've got 100 lay hens on pasture, and then we do pasture raised and woods raised hogs. And I've got a market garden with some greenhouses. So we do a little bit of everything. And we started in 2011.
Awesome. Thank you. Dean?
Yes, good morning. I'm Dean Manning, and we farm in Falmouth, Nova Scotia, just outside of Windsor, and we have a cow-calf operation and market garden vegetables and greenhouses, and it's a full-time operation, and we took that on probably back in 1997 from my parents, and have about 100 cows, and yeah, we just kind of have some forestry as well, but we don't do a lot with that at the moment. So that's kind of my background.
Great. And Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Trenham. We have a broiler chicken farm here in the valley. We're just outside of Port Williams. We have 3 barns that we probably place about 20,000 birds every 7 weeks. Uh, as this year, we're actually getting into a new venture. We're starting a broiler breeder operation, so we'll be producing our own hatching eggs for our chicks.
Okay, awesome. And Dan, you should probably introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm Dan Mosley. I'm the dairy specialist with Perennia. Um, yeah, I'm looking forward to doing the first one of these from a livestock perspective on cost of production, a live webinar. So interesting to hear what people have to say, the panelists there, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah. So for the next hour, Dan and myself, we're going to ask some questions to our guest speakers and hopefully have some really good discussions about cost of production from a livestock focus. Dan, do you want to get the conversation started?
Yeah, and these two we've put some questions aside here just to get the conversation started, but we're happy for that to go along, and as long as it's of interest and we can get some value from that. But we'll bring these in just as and when needed. But first question I'll have, and I'll start at the top of the list here. From what I see, I have Jack there. So Jack, when did you begin tracking your cost of production, and what made you start?
Well, I started tracking it not just with our own farm books, and when I started farming, um, and I found it overwhelming because of the amount of numbers and details, and we made do with it for about 10 years, and then we had a major change in the farm at that time, um, and then since 2008. Or shortly thereafter, I started in a program that came out of the UK called Kingshay, and it I'm very pleased with it. It monitors and record. Well, I give the information to it, and it records our. We give a report every month, and then a report this year over last year, year over year results. It allows us to do some benchmarking. I'm just really, really happy with it. And that's on the milk production side of things. It has nothing to do with cropping part of the program that I use is for the livestock part of it, not the cropping part of it. That's when I started, and that's how it has evolved for me.
Okay. Thanks, Jack. Let's go same question, Amy. What would just to reiterate that? When did you begin it, and what was the reason? What made you start tracking your cost of production?
My dad is a chartered accountant, so he probably would have killed me if I didn't track my all of my costs of production. When I first started back in 2011, I had the cutest paper ledger that I filled everything out on because I was still quite small. Um, one and I was doing that and sort of my dad was like teaching me how to do my taxes through that. But he handled like corporate tax. And so he actually recommended that we find an accountant who specializes in farm taxes where they are different. And so I probably switched to we switched and used FBC, Farm Business Consultants, I think, starting in 2014 or 2015. And then because we were using them, we were using their program, which was Cashew. And it was really, really easy to fill out all of like you could fill out shavings, but group the shavings under hogs versus shavings that were going to be used for poultry. So that was a really great way for us to track that stuff. We no longer use FBC. I do still have an accountant who specializes in farm taxes, though, and we just use an Excel sheet now with him that he's made for us specifically. So it's very easy because it works like very specifically with our farm and what our expenses are going to be.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Um,
Dan,
yeah.
the second part of your question was why, and I forgot to answer that.
Yeah. What made you start? Yeah.
Well, debt. That's what made me start.
Debt. Yes. Okay.
We were so highly leveraged that we had to make sure that our cost control was solid, and
Yeah.
we really just had to watch every penny. And the only way we could have done that was to start monitoring everything, right? Measure as much as we could measure, and just keep close track of things. So it's not as nice to have the numbers, certainly, but why I did it originally is because we were so highly leveraged, we couldn't afford any mistakes. We just had to know where every penny was going.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, and I see a lot of established farms, and they usually say if they can pay their bills, then they're okay. So why measure? But it's more, how can you become more efficient? But that's a different perspective that you're coming out of it from having that debt or that amount of debt in the first place in there. So
Yeah.
okay. Uh yeah. Dean. So yes, again, just when did you begin tracking, and what was it that made you start?
Yeah, so we kind of always have tracked it somewhat, and initially, I think, if you go back far enough when we started, like everything was kind of handwritten and books and ledgers and that sort of thing. And then from that, you'd pull some numbers out and do some cost of production. And quite a few years ago, even when computers started and some spreadsheets started, just kind of developed a little for the cattle portion of it, made up a little template that we give a cost of production. So we'd have, you know, I just forget what the specifics were, but broke it down to cost per pound of gain, return on investment per pound of gain, and broke it down for the livestock. But originally, too, we were involved in those. The Department of Agriculture used to have a farm management division, and they used to do farm management analysis projects program, and which should come out to the farm, and we'd go through the data and put it in, and you'd spin off a report at the end when everybody was in, and you'd also be able to you'd have your report, but you'd benchmark against others in the province and the industry. So that was pretty useful until which time the department kind of did away with that. But we've also done some of the national beef cost of production studies when they're usually every 4 or 5 years. We try to get involved with that as well, so that gives us some benchmarking. But like recently, and I should say recently, it's probably been 15 years or better that uh, we started on a program that FCC had, the Ag Expert one, and found that it was a really good financial program. And the beauty of that when we started is we could do percentages to operations. Like with our operation, it's so diverse and mixed with the like we just don't have one commodity, it's several. Even the vegetables are in 10 or 15, you could break that down into 10 or 15 different categories. So it was kind of nice. You could take let's say a fuel expense or a labor expense, and you can break it down like 20% or 50% into livestock, and you could break it down 14 or 17% greenhouse, and then like it broke it down that way. So you could have a kind of a cost of production. And as much as the other way we can kind of measure cost of production a bit is agri stability, and I know it, and I'm the first to say like agri stability is not really a great program for a diverse farm, but at the end of the day, it also gives some data, especially if you've been on it, because there's some reference margins and Olympic averages and things, and you can kind of use that to kind of compare data. And I guess the same as similar to Jack, but maybe a little different, like where we took it from a next generation farm. Even though I grew up on the place, the reason why we started keeping more and more data was just for ourselves. Because even though you're familiar with an operation, unless you start, paying the bills and running through the income and expense and know where you're going and where you've been, it's data's data, and good data can take you quite a few places. So that's kind of in a nutshell where we were on that.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay.
If I can hop on to what he just said, um, especially in diverse farms, and something that we're always looking at is is one of our enterprises paying for another enterprise to survive? So if
Yeah.
you have the ability to break down all of your costs of production, and you can see, like, if you get to the end of the year and you have a profit, and you're like, well, I have a profit, or I paid for everything and it's fine. But really you look into everything and you realize, oh, I could actually be focusing more on poultry because it's carrying the bulk of the profit, and I should be doing less hogs because they're more work equals more labor costs, and their profit margins either very small or breaking even. Then maybe I could get rid of my hog enterprise and put my focus into what's actually making money, and therefore become more successful and more sustainable in my overall firm. So that's another great reason to have it, not just like what is your overall feed cost if you have multiple animals, but what is the feed
Hmm.
cost of the chickens versus the hogs versus the cows, to really break it down and be like, is anyone actually relying on this other enterprise to survive? And then from there, you can choose, does my heart love it and I'm going to do it anyway? Or actually, this is something that's frustrating me, and I thought we were fine all along just because there was money. But if I'm working really hard and I'm feeling frustrated in this enterprise, and oh look, it's also not making us much money, having those numbers allows you to cut out the things that are sort of holding you back.
That's really good point.
So have you done that? I mean, is
Yep.
that something you've done? Yeah. Okay.
Yep,
Yeah.
lots. Yep, big time.
Because I know
You've
you
helped
say
us
like
make
your heart
huge
can be in
cuts.
it. If your heart's in
Yep.
it, you might want to say, well, I like this, even though, but you've treated it very much like a business then. Yeah.
I have a dairy cow that I love a lot, and those chickens, they pay for some of her, and that's okay. We've made that decision, but we've made some huge changes on our farm over the year. We cut out our sheep flock that we had, that I also loved, but had to realize that as much as I loved them, they were
Mm.
sucking income from the farm and sucking my availability to put
Yeah.
energy into other areas of the farm. So we released them. We've overhauled our hog operation hugely over the last couple of years and just made it so that I'm really able to focus my time and energy on what pays us. And then it did allow for me to have a bit of a heart animal that is just for me. But I can be more profitable in other areas because I have more time available to put
Yeah.
into them.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks, Dean. Mark, same question to you. When did you begin and what made you start tracking cost of production?
Like with our provincial board, we've always kind of had to track our cost of production.
Mm.
And we use Egg Expert like Dean does, and that's really helpful on the financial things. But for other metrics, from a board perspective, they need our data in order to go into price negotiations with our processors. So they are very, I printed off one here. So every flock we have a whole metrics that we have from the flock that we send into the board, and that they compile that as a whole industry. And so when they go to price negotiation, they have all that information. So it forces us, and it's the right thing to do, it is to track all that information. And then we can, at a farm level, we can track our metrics and our cost per flock from flock to flock to flock, because we'll have on our farm probably about 20, 22 flocks a year. And so we can see how we are doing from flock to flock. So some of the things we track are our chick cost, our return for kgs, our feed conversion, and different things like that. So that kind of forces us to have that all set.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Then, yeah. So I mean, I guess one of the big points of doing something like this is that what can you do? What change can you make if you have that information, isn't it? That's the
Yeah. So like
that's what you're trying to get
I've
to.
just taken over the operation in the last year or two from my father, and
Hmm.
he's never one for keeping things on computers. There's always paper ledgers. But once you start putting in your just a simple Excel sheet of all your metrics, and you can see how you are tracking. Because if
Hmm.
you have it all laid out on paper, you can't see. But once you start tracking, you can see how this
Yeah.
decision affects that decision and what you need to improve from different areas and different performance metrics. If you can increase those, that will increase your bottom line as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm going to jump
Perfect.
in here because that leads really well into another question that I have. So Mark, you're talking about the metrics that you're collecting. So my question for the panel would be, what information are you collecting? Like when we're talking about these different metrics, what are you actually keeping track of, and how often are you going in and adding that in? How often are you recording it? Do we want to keep the same order? Jack, do you want to?
Sure, I'll start. Yeah. Uh, well, there's a lot of things that go into the cost of production. Uh, well, I measure every day what the cows and the heifers eat, but I record that on a piece of paper once a month. The total that we've fed for that month. Um, uh, our labor we pay every 2 weeks, and so I know every month what that number is, and I can compare that to the month prior and the same month the previous year. Um, Realistically, my production costs, operating costs, are done monthly. As far as most of my crop inputs, that's done, I'd say, every 6 months. And any other inputs, as far as supplies go, like supplies for the milking herd or bedding, sand, fuel, that is done quarterly. And that's from our own books. We used to use Ag Expert, but we found it cumbersome, so we don't anymore. Um, yeah,
Okay.
that's what
So
we
there's
do.
a lot.
So
Can
yeah, there's a lot of different moving parts here, and it's seasonal. Our expenses can be seasonal, just like most farms,
Yep.
because we produce a lot of the feed that we feed. A lot of what we produce, we feed, and those costs vary from month to month greatly. They can be low in February and high in May and high in October. So usually we're comparing year over year. Some things we're trapped into some things we just have to spend money on, like crop inputs. We do everything we can to save on that and make sure our applications are accurate and everything is calibrated and we don't waste anything. So we don't, and then we're hoping for a good yield based on weather. So we keep track of all those numbers, which is fine, but the top line is every bit as important as the bottom line. Like we have to make sure that we have good production from the land that we have, good production from the cows. That is every bit as important as what lies below it on the balance sheet, on the spreadsheet.
Yep. Thanks. Amy?
Yeah, so my accountant would prefer that I'm entering my data in monthly. Realistically, I do it in January, um, once a year. And we look year over year. However, I am paying attention throughout the year to price changes in individual things, such as like if we just look at my broilers, I'm looking at chick price, feed, processing, labels, my licensing, those things. And if those change throughout the year, then I will adjust my pricing on my chicken at the time. So like last year, we had two price increases on our poultry processing throughout the year. So I made changes in my chicken costs to make sure that I wasn't going to like go under that year somehow. So we will make changes that way, but typically at the beginning of the year, we look at what our prices were, our costs were last year. We set our price, and then we go through the year on the assumption that things are going to be approximately the same price. And if we see a flag of something like a feed cost jump or a processing cost jump or something, then at that time we'll adjust. But we're like for the broilers, we look at all of those costs, your chick feed, processing, labels, licensing, bedding. But then we also factor in all of the man hours for them. So including, we also factor in like gas because we have to go pick up our chicks and then we trailer our birds to the processor and go back and pick up. So we factor in the gas pricing, but then also all of the man hours. So most times one poultry flock for us, which is about 425 birds, will be about somewhere between 75 and 80 man hours. So we make sure to factor that in at a minimum of $25 per hour. Um, and that's how we set our pricing. So we are including what our what we would like to have for labor. And even so, on poultry specifically, like we'll have a buffer that's a bit higher than that to make sure that if something jumps that we can't sort of account for, we're still going to make sure that we're hitting that hourly rate that we would like to get. Once we get into other things like crops and stuff, those things I find are a lot more difficult um, to adjust for, especially in the moment. But there are some things that if we know essentially what our primary set pricing is, we can, yeah, account for a price changing in there.
Dean, same question to you. So what information are you collecting and how often do you record it?
Yeah, so we would collect pretty much well all your expenses for sure and all the income that the farm generates and expense too. Like and probably and we would record that. Like Catherine looks after that, and she's kind of and so that's kind of her focus too. So she likes to do it weekly, but more realistically, it might be every second week she sits down and makes sure all the income and expense are put in. So we're always fairly current on our records. So if we need to know what our financials are, they're pretty accurate. They we'll get into this maybe a little bit later, but like with our cattle program, we started on another one, Cattle Max, and that's dialing in more in depth, I think, than what the ag expert would. So it has more of the production and the forage and things like that. So I can talk about that a little bit later. But all the expenses, all the income go in. The only thing that doesn't go in, and it's something that should be done, is it's my labor, my time. Like I don't put that in, and probably should, because when you do a cost of production, it doesn't really give you a true cost other than, you know, and hopefully you're on the positive side of it. Well, more than hope, you want to be on the positive side, but there's that component and the opportunity cost as well for some things. Like we don't do that unless we're doing a budget and they kind of want to actually see, what difference things make, either changing up divisions of the operation, or whether we want to add something or take something away. So that's kind of like in a nutshell on what we do with the information.
Mhm. Awesome. And Mark.
For
Um,
us, accounting wise, we're trying to keep everything up to date, like as Dean says, just so we can go in and see where we're at a certain time. And since like we're not a very seasonal operation, like we don't grow any of our own grains for our feed. We buy everything in, buy our own chicks in. So everything's just kind of the same repeat over and over every 7 weeks. So it's just basically focusing on that one flock, or we have multiple flocks at a time. So we're kind of looking at every day. I'm recording our mortality, so how many birds we're losing, uh, why we're losing them, so that can kind of tell us what we might have to fix, or what if there's a problem in the flock, and if we can address that. Weights, so we can track flock to flock how our weights are doing daily and weekly. So if that's kind of getting out of skew, we can say, well, we'll look at our feed. We can talk to our feed company and say, well, what are we using for a base? Are we using corn? Are we using wheat? Should we switch that up so we can kind of get the growth that we're expecting? Because for us, we grow a 230 bird and we're growing it for 33 days. And so we want to try to be within those parameters every time. And so by tracking your metrics, you want to make that target. Um, so we're also kind of looking at how much they're gaining every day, sort of average daily gains. And a big one is feed conversion. So how efficiently the birds are turning the feed they eat into meat. And that's a huge one, for especially on the side of feed companies and genetic companies, because if you can shave a couple points off of that, you are making money a lot. And they look at that from like a national perspective. If you can shave a couple points off of that, it's the amount of grain you're saving, and that's huge savings for us. Um, and another, and our plant also sent us like a whole schematic of how the flock did, of like what disease portion the birds were, different scratch scores, and different things like that. So they will condemn birds at the plant and charge them back to us. So we are trying to get the best performance and best health out of these birds, because that costs us at the end of the day. So that's a really big thing for us to kind of help understand how we're doing. Is they're giving us kind of like a post-mortem on our birds to see how we're doing. And so like I kind of like, for us, we can track a lot of the number, like the dollars and cents, but with our industry, we find if you focus on the metrics, performance metrics, that really translates into dollars.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just interested, just to go around each of you again. A couple of times benchmarking's been mentioned, and so my question is really how are you benchmarking? Is this something you're doing? How regular are you doing it? Do you have conversations with other people using a similar programs, whatever they may be? Is it meetings, and just how open other people are as well, whether it's just purely on paper, the information that you're seeing or the conversations that you're having. So a few parts to that, but it's about benchmarking. How are you benchmarking the value to that, and what does it look like for your each of your farms? Jack, I'll start with you on that.
Sure, Dan. Yeah, benchmarking, I value that very highly. Sometimes us as farmers, we tend to operate in these little silos or independent thinkers, but you know, I think that's a way of the past. We have to be cooperative and we have to share information with people that are like-minded and be honest about it. And I've lived by that since I started farming. I've always been very open to other producers on what my costs are, what my challenges are, and you soon come to realize which people are on the same page as you, and then you develop that relationship with those producers over time, and you end up with this small group of people that you trust and that also are do good jobs. Some of these fellas that I speak with are the top managers in the Maritimes, and we're all committed to see each other be successful. So it's a very open conversation when I talk to them. Um, I'm on this King Shea program through Dan at Perennia, and there's some benchmarking done between other farms that are producing milk. And I find that very valuable because all of the measurements are done the same. Everybody is inputting the same kinds of numbers from the same data, so we get very similar reports. You can compare apples to apples that way. And then Dan knows who everyone is, and he can comment on where he thinks there are improvements that can be made and what some of the challenges are that are coming down the road. Um, I've in the past I've invited two other dairy producers to the farm here. It was a three-way deal. Me and two other producers. They came here first. I opened up all my books and all my management strategies on what we did on the farm here day to day and year over year, debt, the whole issue. We walked through the farm, discussed everything that I was doing, and then they had inputs on what they thought was good and what they thought could be improved. And then we did the same thing with the other fellas. And so at one point went to another farm, did the same thing. So you had some real top managers sharing information, very personal business information that some people would say is personal. I don't see it that way. We're all just want to be successful, and we're willing to help each other out to get that way. So I think in being open and what you're doing and how you're doing, how you're being successful will lead the conversation from other producers, so you can share information. All of us can move ahead together. That's been one thing I've valued very much. So being part of an organized cost of production program is one thing, and the second is maintaining relationships with other top producers so you can share what's successful, what's not, what strategies in buying feed or cows or people or whatever. It's yeah, we just can't operate in our silos. This is a good forum to share what each of us are doing, but it goes beyond that, I think, to be successful long term.
Thanks, Jack. Amy, same question to you.
Yeah, I'm very open about all of the financial workings of our farm. I often post online costs of production for things, but also what we are charging and what type of profit margin we're trying to look for in order to make sure that things are actually paying for themselves. I love having discussions about money, because I felt growing up and still a lot of people just keep, keep the amount of money that they're even making or charging for things to themselves, but it makes it very difficult to know if you're doing things correctly, if you're missing something somewhere, if you're looking at another farm thinking, oh, that farm's really successful, but you have no idea what type of income it takes to have that farmers. So I'm really open with conversations. I feel like in the industries, like in the sectors that I'm in, not everyone is very forthcoming, even with costs. And so sometimes I wonder, like, oh, is your feed company giving you a better price than me and you
Mm.
know that and you don't want me to ask the feed company? Like I sometimes I feel like I don't know, is there something on like happening that you're not allowed to talk about maybe? I feel like it is getting a bit better. I've gone to a few conferences where I went to one where I talked about our cost production breakdown, and I went all the way through, and then I listed like how many pounds of chicken breast we produce in a year, how many pounds of thighs and whole birds and
Mm.
pork chops and all of that, and said, this is what we make out of it, and this is what it costs us to get there. And then I feel like once we start having those conversations, people are a bit more willing to come up and share their costs, and what they're charging and who they're charging it to. I'm in a really small market, so a lot of our stuff is going like directly to a retailer or directly to a consumer. So I actually think it's really important in my small bubble to be talking about costs, to be able to understand like what are restaurants willing to pay for chicken, like what are you charging for bulk lettuce and things like that, so that we can not only be able to possibly pull our pricing up if we are potentially pricing too low, um, in hopes that somebody buys it and we don't get passed over, but also to make sure that we're all sort of at like a fair advantage of like what is it costing us to produce this? Can we maybe go in and save on seed buying or soil buying or any of those things? And then at the same time, can we all make sure that we're offering about the same price out to restaurants or at markets or things like that, as long as you're factoring in yourself what you need to make. But I've had open conversations at market with other producers who were charging, like very low prices for things. And I've outright asked them, like, I'm like really surprised that you can produce it for that price. And sometimes through that conversation, you actually will see that producer then put the price up, and it was because they were worried they just wouldn't be able to sell their cucumbers unless they were 50 cents a pound. And we're all
Mm.
like, well, the rest of us are charging $1.75 a pound. So, like I think we all can make money if we make sure that the prices are actually fairly, distributed between, and
Yeah.
you'll make more money in doing that as well. And actually maybe make money on that product that I think you're likely losing money on. So I'm comfortable having those conversations. Um, some people I find on my smaller scale of things are not, but I do feel like being really open and wanting to talk about money and discuss the costs and everything, it's starting to allow other people to also feel comfortable talking about that.
Mm.
Amy, I'm just going to jump in really quickly. Kind of a side question, but how do your consumers, like, what's their reaction been to that kind of transparency?
Anytime I do list like pricing and costs and stuff, most of the time people will say, "Oh my God, I had no idea that like last year that $10 on every whole bird I sold was just processing."
Yeah.
Like it most of the time they're just like, "Oh, wow, I had no idea." Like, so actually you're doing all of this work that I list online. So like they can see me working every day. And they're like, "You're doing all of that and you're only making like $7 on that." That's and then they're like, "Can I buy more chicken?" Often, like honestly, most of them are really good about that. And I think it's because I come from a really honest place to be like, I put out there, I'm not growing tomatoes as cheaply as possible and getting them out to you for the same price that you would grow tomatoes for, because I need to make a living off of this. I need to charge for my time. And you actually want me to charge for my time because I'm still going to have tomatoes when it's a drought and yours are failing, right? Like you want me to succeed. So in succeeding, I have to take me into consideration. And I have that conversation a lot online. So I do feel like my consumers are comfortable with the fact when I start listing, like, this is the price we're going to sell our hogs for this year because this is our feed cost, this is our piglet cost, this is our processing cost. And that means that that hog is going to cost me like almost $1,000 just to raise it, and it's going to be here for 5 months. So I need to be paid for those 5 months that I'm caring for them. And when I phrase it that way, like nicely, I find that they don't mind it at all. Yeah. That it's
Really?
actually good because it's putting a human behind their food, which I think is really important. Um, And it's really showing them the cost because sometimes, especially with the discussions online and amongst consumers these days about food pricing, everyone thinks that if food costs a lot, it's because somebody somewhere is just trying to get in there and be a billionaire off of their backs. And I think there's a lot of talk about, the owners of like Superstore and Sobeys and places like that. But what I often try to tell people is like that food, the cost of that food is too much in the profit that those people are making. But realistically, that food is probably actually underpriced because the people behind it who are growing it are likely not getting enough money for what they do. And they're likely also not paying their staff enough, even if they very much want to be paying like living wages across the board. They're likely not doing that in order to keep food prices down. So if we want to be actually paying true food prices that value the human beings that are behind them and the environment that's behind it and all of that, food prices actually would be higher. So yeah, I try to say that as nicely as possible, as hard as it can be to go to a grocery store and or to go anywhere and spend a lot of money on food. Like food's the only thing that gets us from birth to death. It's the only thing that keeps us alive. Everything else is filler. So I'm often trying to have a conversation about like it's a valuable thing that we're putting into our body, no matter, if it's eggs or dairy or meat or produce or whatever. It's very important that we actually value it. And if we can respect that and respect what goes into it, then paying the true price for the food, I think, comes easier.
Yeah. Super interesting.
Thanks, Amy. Dean, I'll ask you as well then. So benchmarking, is it something you do? How do you share that regularity? What value do you put in that? How does it happen?
Yeah, so with benchmarking, we probably don't, I wouldn't say we do it as often as probably some of the other industries. I mean, typically, the beef industries, a lot of cost of production. You ask producers, and they're probably not really sure what the cost of production is. So, what's really
Mm.
nice is when we are looking to do a cost of production survey, and we get a group of like-minded producers together, and we can have some pretty good discussions. And I know a couple of times over the years, and it's not every year; it's maybe every few years when they kind of want to do a survey to kind of get a dialed down numbers and idea where the industry's at. So when we do that, it works really well because it's same as Jack. Like we can have these conversations with other producers when you say, "Well, this is my cost. What's your cost?" And we share that information back and forth. But you really have to have, like, in order to benchmark and to share that information, you have to have producers that have that data as well. Like
Mm.
vague data, good poor data in is poor data out, or like it's hard to make good decisions on that. So by having that and like the just the benchmark itself, and you can kind of even every couple of years when you have that, you can kind of compare. You can compare to see if you've made the improvements, if you need to go in a different direction. So that's where we sit with the benchmarking.
Thanks, Dean. Mark, lots of numbers you guys have. Is there much benchmarking and conversations, meetings that you have?
Yes, for what we get like on a flock basis for our returns from the plant, we'll get kind of benchmarked of what the industry average or what the plant's seeing over the last 8 weeks or so, and then what our last flock was for that barn. So that's kind of a nice kind of see, are you where you need to be? Are you doing well compared to the industry, or you're got something to fix? Our board actually does give us some data feedback that they give us that we submit. So that's nice. That's based on chick cost and mortalities and feed costs. But our industry, I would say, for a long time was always very closed lips, and it still kind of is. But we're getting a new generation in now that's kind of like more open to conversations on what's working and
Okay.
what's not. I've got some good friends that have poultry farms too, and we're all kind of buying from different people, buying from different feed mills, different feed chick companies, so we can kind of see, compare. Well, you guys are doing this. How come? Why am I not there as well? But I've always kind of found that the best person to benchmark is your yesterday. So how were you doing?
Yes.
Yes, like
Yeah.
yesterday, am I better than I was yesterday? That's kind of
Yeah.
where you can compare yourself to other people, but the best person to compare yourself is to yesterday, I
Yeah.
find.
I agree. I think in the experience I've had, benchmarking is one of those things people like to see how they compare to other producers. But after some time, it's about how you're trending in your own business and benchmarking against yourself. I think that's a very valuable thing to make,
Yeah, I
point to
agree.
make. Yeah.
So I think so we're coming up closer to the end of the hour. So I think we'll ask one more question to the panelists and then we'll open it up to general discussion. So I'm kind of curious. So if there's people who are participating on the call right now, they might be like a new producer, they might not be that far into their journey with cost of production. What advice would you, as a panelist, give to somebody who was starting to like collect records, collect their costs, make sense from those numbers? Um, Jack, do you want to start with that?
Yeah. The costs that are easy to calculate are interest and the money that's on your credit card or your accounts at different businesses and what you're selling your product for. The numbers that are very hard to calculate from a month to month basis or as you're operating are some of your fixed cost depreciation. What happens, you have deferred maintenance on structures and buildings or greenhouses, then, that is a cost that's kind of hidden, but I still think it has to be accounted for somehow. So I'd be very careful on working your assets without putting something away to take care of them down the road.
Yeah, so I think when I first started, I was calculating all the really easy factors in your feed, your livestock cost, your processing costs, that kind of stuff. And I really wasn't factoring in my time. And I kind of thought that farmers didn't do that. And I think maybe many don't. But I started to realize on times when I was feeling super frustrated and like, why am I doing this? Or everything's going wrong or whatever, like you're having a hard moment. I started to realize it's because I wasn't factoring myself into any of this. So any time feed price jumped or something, if I didn't react fast enough to put my price up, now it was eating into just the other costs I had factored in, and I wasn't, it's essentially like deleting me from the system. So I started putting in how many hours, and it won't be exact, but like how many hours on average is each flock going to take from me or each herd of pigs or any of that? What am I putting in? And at a bare minimum, what do I need to make? And that has to get factored into everything that I'm pricing out. And like with my garden, it's a little different because I'm doing market gardening. So it's like small amounts of each crop. So I don't separate it crop by crop, but I do look at like how many hours am I expecting to be in here? So how much money does this garden have to give me based on the amount of hours that I expect to spend? Um, and so actually putting that in has given me buffer for difficult times, for droughts or heavy rains or for, something weird to happen with my feed, any of that. It's just given me enough of a buffer that I'm not charging right at my cost of production and then something happens and all of a sudden I'm losing money. I do have that space. So I would say that from the beginning, if I could have been calculating myself into it, I would. And second to that, I wouldn't have paid as much attention to what others were charging if it was a lot lower than me. So I'm in an area where obviously I'm doing markets and things like that, so I can charge my own prices for it. I'm not tied into someone taking all, like buying all of my chicken already. So instead of being like, what is the cost of a half a pig these days? I've never really looked at that. And I would recommend people don't look at that if they're raising hogs on a smaller scale, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to tell you it's $3 a pound, and they're likely not doing it anywhere near the way you're doing it. So you need to make sure that you're looking at everything that could go into it, giving yourself a wage in there. And then there's likely additional costs like the amount of electricity or tractor use or like all of those things as well. So if you're doing the math on that and it's $6 a pound that you need to charge, and you're seeing on Kijiji, a bunch of people are doing it for 3. One, a bunch of them probably aren't actually looking at their cost of production properly. So don't compare yourself to them. And two, be honest about what your costs are, because if you're doing them a certain way and it's more expensive, as long as you're not having like health issues with your hogs or like some red flags going up, then you need to make sure that you are charging what the cost is and not just relying on what somebody who might be doing it as like a backyard side project thing just to pay for the cost of the feed of their own hog, like something like that. I just see a lot of people on smaller scale farmers on Facebook essentially trying to price their hogs out just in comparison with other people, and other people are posting, oh, I'm just raising 2 extra pigs to pay for the cost of my own, and then their price is super super low, and then people are trying to actually match that. It doesn't make sense. You have to make sure you're looking at your own numbers and charging appropriately. There's no point in going in debt based on comparisons.
Yeah, it's like a race to the bottom almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dean?
Yeah. So I would think the first thing when you want to start doing this kind of stuff is take a step back, get the book, The Wealthy Barber, and read it. And then that kind of sets an umbrella up for like where things fit in life and where your farm fits in life. But on the farm specifically itself, or as a business, start simple and keep track of things. And whether you use if you're comfortable with a spreadsheet program, go with that. There's a lot of programs out there that either you like or you don't like, and I think a lot of programs now they have a 2 week trial period, so you can give them a try. I mean, we played with some in the past that we just on the cattle side we just weren't um, we got into it and they were just too complex, we thought so, and so we tried again, and I know they've evolved over time too, and I think they've got simpler programs now. So start put your costs in, know what your cost. That's the first thing. Like, I mean, you got to know what your cost of production is, and all the points the other speakers raised as well. I mean, you got to put a labor cost in for yourself. You've got to put we call the dirty five in there with your depreciation, your taxes, and things like that. You've got to know what those costs are because they don't show up on your expenses so much, but there are costs that you realize at some point in time. So if you start with a number, you start with data, and then as you evolve and you get more, you're going to look for more information, and then you can dig into something a little bit deeper and get a little more detail on where you want to go with it. But at least start with something.
That's great. Mark?
For us, I've kind of found that more information the better. If you look back at my spreadsheets a year or two, you'll see that in the beginning, half of it's blank because I wasn't keeping track of those metrics. But as time goes on, I keep on tracking more and more and more stuff. But one thing I would say is make a budget, have a business plan to just don't, oh, I'm going to do this, have it planned out. And if you can kind of forecast what your year is going to look like and what you want to plan, and you can compare what you're doing and what your plan is, you'll kind of make sure you're staying on track and you're not going into the red. Yeah, there'll be things that'll happen that are not in your plan, but if you can have that kind of initial plan to see my feed cost should be X compared to my profit, so you should kind of be looking ahead instead of just kind of comparing yourself to everyone else. You should have a solid plan in place before you get going.
Okay. That's great. I'm just having a look here, either in the chat. I'm not seeing any questions. Also, the Q&A. I'm not seeing any questions. So if anyone has any, this is your moment. Or Dan, I don't know if you've got any final questions that you'd like to ask. Okay, we got a question here. What would be the best way to connect with others who are willing to talk about cost of production with you in your style of growing? I think that's just a general question.
Well, I don't know what commodity it is or what scale, but you just don't stay home in your own yard. Like get out to industry events, out to farmers markets, get out and talk to people, and you'll find common ground with some. Uh, it takes effort. There's just not a list of people that you can go talk to, unless it's a specialist. And I wouldn't be afraid to ask anyone for help if that's their job, is to help you with cropping or succession or financial management or whatever it might be, production. Ask for that help, and there may be a resource there that they can point you to, that perhaps someone you could talk to. That would be in a similar situation to you if you have a hard time identifying someone. But that list is not going to come to you. You have to go for it.
I just see there's follow-up here. Anyway, the NSDA or Prenia staff can host these kinds of discussions or help. And yes, so whoever your specialist is, there's a list on our Prenia page. Send them a message and we will get back at you and we'll help with this. It's something that we want to actively facilitate.
There was a conference, I think it was a small farm conference that they're hoping to do yearly, I believe, that we did last year. And in that, we had a session that was breakdown on cost of production. I did the cost of production of meat. They were talking to somebody else about produce, I believe. And those for sure. We also had a small poultry workshop. There's going to be a couple more along the province. And at those, people were very open to talking about their costs and their barriers and sharing information. I was just at the Acorn conference yesterday. Many of those people were very open to talk about what are you paying? Like, what is your price of feed, or where are you getting your seeds from, and what's the cost? We had a conversation with somebody who said, like, oh, did you know there's like a $500 difference between Johnny's seeds and Himoing or something like that. Like, so there are people that are willing to talk about that. Sometimes if you're online and you're already following a farm that might seem a bit open about those things, or just open for discussion on a lot of farm things, if they're doing something the way that you want to do it or the way you are doing it, reach out and ask them. Sometimes just asking the question, just starting it, is a great way to find out who is willing to share and who isn't. Sometimes we just need the question asked.
There was another point here just in the comments that the ag reps with the NSDA and the business development officers can also assist with that.
Yeah.
So there's a question for Amy. Any concern of price fixing if openly discussing and setting prices for product in your market?
No, because none of us are setting a price. So the one time I'm talking about approaching somebody about what they were selling, like their cucumbers for at market, I went and I made a relationship with this farmer first. And then while we were talking, I was asking them how comfortable they are with their farm, with their operation. Is it working for them? Like, what are the things? And they were saying, oh, well, farming's so hard to make any money in. And then I had a discussion about, are you factoring in your labor into these costs? And then I brought up, I noticed that when you were selling your cucumbers, they were only 50 cents a pound. Many of us were selling them for like closer to $1.75. I'm factoring in, and like, maybe even higher depending on what type of cucumbers. But I said, I'm trying to factor in my labor, give myself a buffer for if we're having difficult years and stuff. If we're all trying to just charge the lowest price so that the cucumbers fly off the shelf and we don't have any, then are you actually losing money on that, but your cucumbers are gone? Like, is that something you would, want to think about? And through that conversation, they said, oh, they weren't tracking their prices. They were essentially looking at how much money did the garden make at the end of the year and how much money did their seeds cost, and that was about it. And so we had a conversation about, well, what ones are taking more time for you, and And do you think your cucumbers are actually making enough money? Like whatever, like different crops. And so they did pull their prices up. None of us were sitting there thinking like we have to have cucumbers at $2 a pound and that's what we're all going to charge. But having an open conversation about, are you actually making enough money on that? Or is this crop a loss leader for you? Like, are you doing that because it pulls a bunch of people in and then they buy other things that you are charging appropriately for? In the case, that farmer wasn't doing that. So it wasn't like they were like, my cucumbers are on sale this week just because I want to bring people in. They were just like, I don't know, I just like, I didn't want to get stuck with cucumbers, so I priced them down here. I think that's a conversation we should be having with people. I think farmers shouldn't be selling things at a loss, especially if they don't even recognize that they're selling them at a loss. So, yeah.
That's great. Any other questions? We do have the printing staff list and the NSTA staff list has been popped in the chat if anyone is looking for those. Not seeing anything in the Q&A. I would like to thank all of our panelists very much for their time and thank you everyone for joining us as well.